Good afternoon, fellow citizens. Welcome back to this another episode of the Citizens Chat Show. My name is Masesa Demiano, and of course today we are discussing the East African integration. Are we getting closer or falling apart? Of course, we've had incidences that are happening around our region here, and we need to really understand. And joined on the panel is a team of my very serious guests that will give us context to the region and understanding of what is happening. And to introduce them, of course, I have Joseph Ochieno, our usual and regular panelist, is a UPC ideologue and a leadership contender for UBC.
Thank
Joseph,
you very much.
welcome.
Thank you very much. You had to start with me instead of starting with my beautiful sisters. Okay.
Yeah. Because you are outweighed today.
We are outnumbered. You are the minority.
And of course, we're joined again by Monicah Amoding, gender activist, a lawyer, and a former MP.
Thank you,
woman MP, yeah.
Damiano, and it's always a pleasure being here.
Thank you very much, Monicah, for honoring the invitation again. And finally, Sarah Bireete, lawyer, executive director with the Center for Constitutional Governance, and a regular panelist. Sarah, we've missed you here for I think 2 or 3 episodes.
Or more, probably.
I was doing some farming. So
she doesn't look one who has been farming.
you should have added that I'm a farmer. I'm glad to be back.
Now, towards Christmas,
which kind of farming is that?
We need to.
Everyone should go into farming then.
So yeah, we should go. Yeah. Now, I think we need to kickstart the conversation. And of course, Sarah, since you've been away, I think while you're doing the farming, and of course, the region has been affected by farmers are really being affected so much. So you'll give us the introduction.
And so, the border has extended.
Yes.
Where?
So yeah, we would want you to give us the historical background of this integration, the East African integration.
Well, the East African community started way back after independence by the pioneer presidents of East Africa. That's Mzee Kenyatta, Dr. Bote, and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. Their aspect of unity was drawing from the Nkrumah philosophy of Africa must unite. And they thought that regional integration would foster African unity, whereby instead of bringing single nations together at the continental level, you are dealing with the blocks or the regional blocks. So you had the East African community, you had the West African, ECOWAS, we had COMESA, we have SADC. So that's the time that all these regional groupings were formed. The objectives of the original East African community was to have uniform services like the East African Railways, the East African Airways, East African Post Office, which also had the bank, East African Post Office Bank, which was during the insurgents and reallocated to Nairobi, then now is back in Burundi. You had, all these entities, and we had each nation, and then the universities, whereby there was harmonization in university education. That's how the likes of Nyerere, and that started before, like how Nyerere did his studies in Makerere, Maichivachi, and then the President Museveni went to Dar es Salaam. And we have many people studied in Nairobi, including Honourable Cecilia Ogwal. So that was the coordination and spirit of the original East African community. We had many professional staff serving at that higher regional level. East African Airways and East African Railways were some of the most effective, transport airways in East Africa and in Africa in general. But the collapse in 1977, that was driven largely by political leaders. One was of course, Idi Amin philosophy in Uganda after the overthrow of Bote I. Idi Amin first wanted to conquer parts of Kenya, Turkana, and annex them to Uganda. And then, of course, he threatened disrespect for his colleagues, including when he made an address and make a mockery of Mwalimu Nyerere as a girlfriend. which was then unheard of. So the mistrust of leaders largely led to the collapse of the East African community, phase one. We saw many people lose jobs. We lost the East African infrastructure services. We lost the cooperation that existed. And generally, I think we could have lost about 100 years of development as a region.
Interesting.
Wow.
In 1999, we saw talks for revival of the East African community by President Museveni, Mokapa, and Moi then. And the discussions led to the East African Treaty in 2000 that was adopted in 2000. And they thought they would do something different that would cushion the community from the original reasons for the collapse. And among those are the three principles of the community. Number one is people-driven. Number two is private sector-led. Number three is taking decisions by consensus. At the first, this seemed to work. You would see a community working
In that
hand in
direction.
hand. We saw the adoption of the customs union. Of course, also the other issue they did to safeguard from the former collapse was to put stages of integration. So the first stage was free movement of people, goods, and services through the customs union and adoption of the common market. This was done in 2008. From there, we saw the movement to the protocols, legal harmonization. They moved to the border, one-stop border posts. They moved to certification of goods so that they are easy to clear.
Identify.
They move so all that has been in the bid to implement the common market protocol and the customs union through systematic steps. Then the second stage was for the monetary union. We have had several discussions at the leadership level, and we should have had one currency by now.
2024.
If leaders would walk the talk, I think we would have had by now. We should have had the East African Central Bank by now. If they were serious on that move of the level of the monetary union. But I do not think that they are up to that standard. And the final stage was the political federation. The political federation was envisaged to come with a confederation constitution and confederation process, and then discussion of the East African constitution and how leadership at that level would be handled for the federation. Instead, we have seen a jump. First of all, the common markets protocol is not fully being implemented. There are challenges. And even as in the news by yesterday, we saw Uganda applying the
same strategy.
reciprocity principle against Kenyan agricultural goods, rebutting the ban of some of eggs, maize, and other agricultural goods that Kenya has banned without following the common market protocol principles. So we have also seen countries, the quick adoption and expansion of the community, because I think South Sudan was admitted in the community in a haphazard manner. It was not well prepared, and it was not given time to prepare. Because under regional integration, you even first bring in countries at observer level to study and understand the principles of the bloc. From the observer level, you can upgrade them to co-opted. When they have met halfway the criteria for qualification for membership, as they finalize, and then the final stage should be membership. But because the process is political-led, instead of people-driven, like the treaty underlines, we see politicians moving in with their selfish interests, advocating and adopting the admission of countries that are ill-prepared to fulfill the commitments of the bloc. And this has you know, diluted the integration process. Sudan, until recently, has been charging visas against the common market principles. Yes. And Kenya, I know Kenya has also been charging visas on South Sudanese nationals in a reciprocity, because they have really, they are saying we are not supposed to charge visas, but if you are charging my citizens, I will also charge yours. But Uganda has not been charging visas to South Sudanese, although Ugandans pay visas. And the argument South Sudan was using was that as a new country, they needed revenue for their internal work. So that's why I'm saying that they should have admitted it in phases. Because if it is still at that level of inability to waive simple things like visas, then maybe it should have been at observer status of the community as it internally prepares itself to fulfill the commitments under the Customs Union's Common Markets Protocol and as well as the East African Treaty in general. We have also seen closure of borders within member states. Uganda-Rwanda border is closed. Rwanda-Burundi border is closed.
Yes.
And also the part of Uganda-DRC border is closed. DRC is not a member of the community, that would be fine. But the Rwanda-Burundi and Rwanda-Uganda borders to be closed in the East African Treaty, I think to me it is the beginning of the collapse of the East African integration agenda. That is if it is still standing.
Interesting.
We have also seen failure to convene the summit because of lack of consensus.
Yeah, true.
That is also another big gap in the integration agenda. Also in the earlier years, around 2015, we saw the emergence of the coalition of the willing. After disagreements on projects to be promoted, and the first was the standard gauge railway, which is supposed to be an East African project.
Yes.
Kenya has done their bit. Tanzania has done their bit. Uganda is still at foundation level after passing budgets for close to 10 years for the standard gauge railway. And those monies are spent. We have not even dug the first hole to the foundation. Yes. When you go to the Twitter handle for the Uganda standard gauge railway, all you see are swamps. The standard gauge railway is supposed to be passing part of the East African Rift Valley, and that requires high investment and engineering works. But we are still at the level of negotiation, attempts to acquire land, attempts to compensate people, where the standard gauge railway is supposed to pass 10 years down the road. So the coalition of the willing that emerged, led by Kenya and Uganda, to me was also another big gap and a failure for leaders to generate consensus as required by the East African Treaty. We have also seen a number of challenges, illegal challenges, in violation of democratic principles set by the East African Treaty. First is the violence and abuse of human rights, rigging elections, also not following uniform procedures in electing members for the East African Legislative Assembly. So these are some of the really, but it's good that the court has been able to push back on some of these issues and check the member states, because that's partly what it is set for. But I think the other biggest challenge is leaving out to the people in the integration process. Because other than the private sector and the business community, with a functional East African Business Council, the rest of the citizens, if you go to my grandmother in Chanamkaka, we go to yours in Busoga, I don't think they know what is happening.
Not at all.
It is a civil servants club, and the ordinary
And the politicians.
don't know what.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that in-depth history and to allow us to really set pace for our discussion today. You've really done justice to it. And in there, I would want to bring Monicah on. And Sarah talks about issues and the stages of integration. Yeah, the pillars of integration. She was clear about that. So we just just need to pick out one issue on that, the customs, because it has been an issue recently. Now, why we're asking why the trade wars when we have that clear cut customs union that was set way long, and it seemed like it was real operational.
Well, first I want to thank my senior colleague for that in-depth history, as well as the contextualization of the East African community and the stages that it has gone through. Of course, the eminent challenges, I think there are more challenges to talk about than the successes this far. And in terms of the successes, of course, well, we first have to know that the treaty that we have embodied all these kind of things. In terms of a framework that was giving the countries foundation, and the where the countries were deriving mandate and all the systems that should be in place, the institutions that should be in place, even the principles of operation which Sarah has highlighted, are all embedded in this progressive treaty that she highlights in terms of going forward and also overcoming the challenges of the past on why the East African community collapsed in the earlier years. And so, of course, the stages of the East African integration, first, the objective of the East African community generally was to deepen and widen. We love that word a lot. Deepen and widen the integration in the areas of politics.
I do.
In the areas of economics, the socio-cultural, issues of security, issues of technology, issues of infrastructure, and of course the legal issues. And so we see all that embodied in the framework in Article 5 of the treaty. And then the treaty goes ahead and provides for those stages of integration, the four, in that ranking, in the order of ranking, the customs union, and then the common market. And then at the apex, we find the monetary union, which we hoped to reach maybe by now, but the politicians are saying by 2024, we'll be having a common currency, rather. And then finally, political federation, which we seem to be looking forward to more than any other, because the politicians, the way some are playing their politics in the region, you can clearly interest yourself in the way they are doing it, and like this one is more interested in the federation than any other aspect of the union. And so where we are at, the economic, the customs union, and how it is working, this is the fundamental. If we are unable to come together in terms of economics, then we cannot even dream of the political federation, I believe, in my view. And so where we are battling a lot is around that. And if you want to know bad manners in humans, look at how they behave when they come near money or issues of economics. You will tell a human being in terms, a good one and a bad one around those areas. And of course in power, how they treat and use power when they have it. So those two, an economic union and then the political federation, those are the biggest challenges we have. But under the treaty, in Article 6 of the treaty, there are those principles. They are all there. The principles of mutual, in order to bring about the economic, integration and all these things we are talking about, political federation, the partner states are supposed to move in tandem with the principles which are key. Sarah highlighted some of them. The principle of mutual trust, political will, sovereignty, equality. Those are very critical. But of course, some countries try to use sovereignty more than the others and claiming that the equality factor and the sovereignty factor more than other countries in the region. There are those who want to dominate based on their sovereignty, of state sovereignty and all that. The other principles which are critical in this discussion are political will, of course, the issues of peaceful coexistence and good neighborliness, cooperation around economic issues. And for me, what is more important in a way of bringing around these operations or this federation to work for all the partner states is that particular general principle which the treaty provides for, that we need to abstain as partner states from such activities that will derail the coming together of the partners in terms of a political federation. And that's where we are. And what is happening right now is that the partner states actually individually are doing activities or actions or, programs in their individual countries sometimes which actually tear the community apart. And now when we touch further in the customs union, of course, Kenya and Uganda recently are having those fights over which goods should enter, which ones shouldn't. We've had that battle already with Rwanda here and Burundi, as Sarah has highlighted. But in the treaty,
including also
Tanzania and Kenya recently, over which milk and what?
Yes.
Whose chicken has crossed the border?
And the treaty says partner states in Article 8 shall, actually the wording is shall, abstain from such actions that will derail the cooperation and the coming together of the East African community. Clearly, when we see that, it is what is happening in the region. Kenya wakes up one morning and says these products can no longer come to our border. Of course, Kenya has really, I want to make this, my personal view is that Kenya has been a bully in the region and has bullied the other smaller states in terms of the economy, although the treaty talks about sovereignty. And of course, Kenya is the third largest economy in the continent of Africa.
The biggest,
in East Africa. So they feel they are entitled. They are this big brother. They cannot do with, Uganda can do without them, Rwanda and the others, but the other countries cannot do without Kenya because it's also, of course, it has a large market, but the terms of trade are very unequal. And I think what is scaring Kenya is the fact that Uganda now has started productions, because after their mini factory, I think the factories collapsed in Uganda. There was minimum production. And so when we try to recover later on in the 80s and up to now, a little bit of production has happened. So we can export a little bit of, more products to Kenya than we used to, although they are largely agricultural products. And so Kenya has more manufactured products coming in. Uganda has largely agriculture going the other side. So the the customs union cannot work out if we do not deal with economic challenges or agreements or cooperation that we need to see in the country, in these partner states. And if we don't sort that out, then it is not going to lead us to the political cooperation. However, I think that Uganda and other countries, of course, we need to exercise caution. What the ministers are doing, Kenya throws out its, ban against Uganda. Then Ugandans also go and sit, politicians, they go and sit in some meeting there and reciprocate the same measures, which are not in the interest of the people of the East African community. Because as Sarah highlighted earlier, the reason why we have this East African is for the good of the people, and that is the key principle of the East African community. Deepen the integration, and it's for the benefit of the people, because the jobs which are lost in these alterations, it is the people, even if they don't understand the importance of the unity, but ultimately it is their jobs, it is the money which is limited in terms of flows in and out, and so jobs are affected, incomes are affected. In my view, the minister of Uganda, who I respect very highly, and her teams, I think, wouldn't have done the same measure. It would have required more negotiation. And being the lawyers that we are, when you look at that, I think even some people who are concerned, I don't know, Pan-Africans in this case, or the East African lovers, or should actually challenge the states, the leadership of these states, and prohibit them from those actions, because the treaty is very, very clear. You shall abstain from such actions which tear people further apart. And so in terms of the enforcement of this treaty, someone can even go to court and cause court injunctions to, to go against the minister's actions and all that they are doing, because it's illegal. It's actually illegal for them to do that, because at the end of the day, the people are affected. and ultimately the jobs are lost and so much is affected. I was talking to somebody from Kisoro. They are saying a bag of Irish right now is going for 50,000. And previously they used to sell it at 120,000 shillings.
Yes.
That is like half the price.
Because of Rwanda.
Because of Rwanda border, the closure. So, and of course even this side. So it's a big challenge in terms of income. So until we sort out issues of economic cooperation, we cannot reach at the political cooperation. But I want to credit the partner states in terms of the infrastructure, because one of the principles is to deepen cross-pollination in terms of policies that they put in place, in terms of the institutions, in terms of the laws that will expedite that integration. One of the areas they are trying to progress is infrastructure. This East African crude oil pipeline, which has been recently embarked on in Tanzania. Of course, Uganda is not doing equally the same in terms of progress like the others. The standard gauge.
Going to Tanzania to launch.
The standard gauge railway, Kenya is almost, I'm told, 80%, and Tanzania 80% in terms of their works. In Uganda, we are at 0. So, but those are fundamental policies, programs, infrastructure that will lead to this deepening
Free
of
movement.
free movement of goods and services, and eventually the development that we aspire for as a region. But there are so many challenges, as Sarah has already highlighted. And I think also I want to conclude on that same matter in terms of the participation of the people. I think we need to see more organizations working around that, even in civil society and civic space, just to engage. It is in the interest of the people that the East African community functions.
That's why we started these discussions, to ensure that at least
so we need to see more work happening in terms of engaging the public and pushing the leaders. You know, the leaders move. There's a lot of political mistrust, and that's one of the things that is failing the cooperation from happening. Others are willing, the coalition of the willing, for certain reasons, and others are not. So where do we go? And then this issue of suspicion all the time. The other one is, especially at political level, there's a lot of suspicion and unwillingness. Actually, suspicion has affected every other operation. There is a belief that somebody wants to be the head of the East African community, and then the other also is looking at the same. So all our policies and programs rotating around political leadership as well.
Interesting, Monicah. Thank you very much for that. Joseph, we picking from what Sarah said, and of course she set the pace for us, especially on the pillars, those stages of integration. And we're still talking about the customs that Monicah has also highlighted. Sarah, towards the end, she also noted that this integration talk is more of for the elites, and so I would want to understand especially during the lockdowns and COVID, we saw a lot of those trade wars. You know, Kenya, Uganda closing, then you see all these regions also closing, but we didn't also see leaders in the region coming possibly together and have a conversation that would give us direction into where to go, especially in that period. Where do you think is the problem?
Well, that is a major problem. And in fact, as my two fantastic colleagues have said, they've nearly said everything, except I'll just possibly brush it up a bit. Really, the East African integration is a political question. Whether or not we integrate is a political question. Whether or not we become one Africa with one government is a political question. How we became East Africa is a political question. How we became a nation state, Uganda, and broken up in pieces is a political question. In fact, how we're in Congo allegedly building Rosebud at the same time fighting ADF is a political question. How we have our relatives stranded the other end of Congo, the other end of Rwanda, our relatives, the other end of Sudan, the other end of Tanzania, and in fact my own other end in Kenya, in eastern Uganda, is a political question. The conscious leaders, founding parents of these countries, woke up to the reality that we'd been cut off into bits, into sweets. So that communities and nations and communities and families were cut apart, and so they would help us, would work as we reclaim ourselves and identity, claim back our independence, freedom, and indeed build as peoples at the center of this. Our parents were rather wise. They thought that we would actually go beyond this and reclaim the one Africa identity as a continent. And so, as Sarah said, the idea that we actually go in bits was a pragmatic move by our leaders then, that what is possible with one Africa. You can imagine the East African community itself, how we got into disintegration. In fact, the disintegration of East Africa, we can blame it on Idi Amin to an extent, and to an extent on Kenya, the brother member that was uniquely away from Obote and Nyerere's view, because Kenya was basically a sweatshop for Anglo-America. And so they really didn't see the imperialist challenge on the African continent as these others did see. And yet within that, how Amin came was because Obote or Uganda was an inconvenience to the penetration of Congo, an inconvenience to the penetration of Sudan. And it's a very important political observations that most Ugandan scholars, if there is any watching, pick it up and run with it on behalf of the young citizens of this country and the young citizens of this continent to move forward in terms of where the Lumumbas were. So these guys were actually contesting to try and say that, look, let's claim back ourselves as a community. One of the reasons why Uganda went to Congo in the 60s, where Bote sent these guys for the liberation of Congo for the Lumumbis. I'm putting it in context. Was primarily because these are our brethren, these Africans. We need to pull ourselves back as we prepare. By the way, Nkrumah had prepared, got a film in which I was at the founding, prepared to send troops to rescue Lumumba, but it became apparent that by then the CIA and others, it was already like too late to rescue these guys. So what were these guys doing? Regionalism, but the biggest object was the continental reunion. And the enemies of Africa saw this as a big threat. Ted Heath, the British Prime Minister, then wrote, and I've got a magazine, and I hope we can find it somewhere, where he said the East African community, as it was being founded in the 60s, it was becoming a threat to them. That had the East African community of the 60s succeeded, it was going to become impossible for them to penetrate. So in a way, the Lumumbis, Taminis thing coming in helped break the integration. So that's very important. And so I am saying this as part of this debate, but I'm saying so that younger people, younger citizens, picking up on these other things, looking forward for the reclaiming of our continent, reclaiming of our identity, the reclaiming of this region, can possibly learn lessons that my two sisters are suggesting. Why? Because the depth of these things is beyond some dubious guy who basically has an ego to rule East Africa. It is bigger than that. Now, the economics is important, but at the end of the day, it's the people. We have to own the process. So there must be brain and so forth. That means the brain thinkers. So for me, that means we have to have the leadership and the thinkers for regional integration. That is where we don't have anybody at the moment. Now, just think about it. How did somebody think that the East African community of Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, fantastic regional integration, with their failures as we're trying to reclaim them, we could easily, quickly rush to bring in Rwanda, different linguistic elements, as a cultural element, slightly different historical perspective. Possibly you'd argue that South Sudan was nearer culturally in that sense, but you bring in Rwanda, what was the argument? It was political, Museveni Kagame, and the interests of the broader Africa, for argument's sake. Then very quickly now we bring South Sudan, which is basically a sub-county, and then you bring it. So really, no, the general convergence criteria, and if I were UPC president of the Republic of Uganda today, I would put the entire process to a halt. I'd put it to a halt. I'd redraw them up. The traditional members, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, revisit all the previous treaties, revisit all the previous arrangements like East African railways and harbors, East African railways, all those kind of projects that already have been reasonably integrated. Where they failed, where they were, see how we're able to regroup them. Before beginning to say, hold on a second, now after we've done phase one, who next? When we begin the next reintegration, not necessarily that we're doing so because we're saying you are there. It's basically a commonsensical, practical thing we're doing. So that the new convergence criteria is this, that we will have a common exams for argument's sake, say for A-level, as it was. But in order to do that, you country must meet this criteria, you must, if you're to join, if you want to become an observer, even meeting an observer status, you need to go through a certain process. You must go through a democratic process, and the election should not be contested. You know, something along those lines. So that if you're to join the preliminary element of the economic union, maybe your tax policies may not be A, B, C, D. Maybe inflation rate must be A, B, C, D, or perhaps your budget towards agriculture must meet a particular element, people oriented to something like that. So that by the time we have an element of average convergence, when we are on the table discussing integration, many of these other commonalities have already been put in together. Number two. Number three, and most importantly, these are political questions that we don't have Mr. Museveni running with it when we don't know what NUP
is thinking.
Because tomorrow NUP may be the leadership, maybe the government. We're going through this process and we have no clue what UPC's thinking is. Thankfully, UPC's thinking is obvious, and it's deep, and possibly the deepest, as far as this is concerned. So meaning these become political issues. And when elections are taking place, you're referring, I think we're talking about East African Legislative Assembly elections. People come and then people just want to put on neckties, when they have no clue what East Africa is all about. But no, a parliamentary candidate in Uganda, should actually be able to persuade people of Soroti that in the event that I'm elected as a legislator in Uganda, these are my views on East African integration. So these are political party major matters. Now, the more we do this, the more it becomes a rigorous element of debate in this country. And the more then we can go to Nagongera or Kinkizi, and the people get engaged in this process because it's their thing, I don't know people from Malaba, which is a border town, in my own border town. I don't know what they know, what do they think. The best they can do is whether we can cross there if the police allow us, if they don't loot a bit of our own thing, go and sell and come back and something like that. But beyond that, people basically just want to ordinarily trade. Now, at the end of the day, when borders are closed, some of them don't even have the headlines of what's been happening. So I think in that way, then you realize you bring the people through the political contestation and debates on the ground, through the process of receiving leaders. And so by the time you actually get a minister for East Africa, you get a minister who's somebody who has an idea what East Africa is. I don't actually know who the leading guys for East Africa today. I'm just putting for argument's sake. I'm not sure how many people Ugandans know who the minister for East Africa is, whether or not they're there for political patronage or they have some kind of expertise or skills. And I think, Damien, during the break, we were having a conversation before coming on set, that maybe it would have been a very interesting conversation with people either who've been legislators or perhaps people who've had policy positions on these matters. So I think the starting point was very false. Maybe as we have this conversation, and now that we have wars in the region, I was telling a friend the other day that just imagine what would perhaps Nyerere say, if they had there's an invasion in between these countries, then they're not members of East Africa. Why would it be the case that actually, if Uganda is under threat, by a neighboring state, perhaps the leaders, heads of state would come and say, a member colleague is at war, is in trouble. What do we do? Why? Because as we do this, just to make it very briefly conclusive, as we do this, what is our regional policy? What is our foreign policy? What are our defense policies? What happens when we're going to the AU? Do we go to the AU as a region on issues to do with trade? Do we have a position on the conflicts in for instance, in Ethiopia? Regional organizations tend to do that. In East Africa, it's a trip by two guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph, for that perspective. And of course, to our viewers out there, of course, we should have had our usual panelist, Witch Paula, who would have given us perspective on how government is looking or treating this this integration. But we've missed him, I think, because he has an assignment in Kayunga, so we hope for the best for them out there. But
Kayunga, East Africa.
Kayunga, East Africa. So we missed him on the show. He sent his regrets. And maybe, Sarah, just as we conclude and possibly go for the break, I just want you to try to score generally on the areas we've been discussing, the 4 pillars, of course, the customs, common market, monetary, and the political federation. Where are we? How do you score us general as a region?
That's difficult.
Are we faring? Are we doing well? Or
in half
are
work in progress?
Are there figures, there's statistics for refer?
Well, that's difficult in 2 ways. One, we have failed on harmonization. Harmonization in ratifications of decisions taken by the community to make sure there is harmony with national laws, and there is a big argument of sovereignty and what takes precedence. If you have, for example, a national law, a constitution that contradicts part of the decisions taken at the regional level, or if a decision was taken at the regional level, then how does it affect the national laws?
Legislations, yes.
Because if we were serious on building with strength towards political integration, then these regional decisions would be supreme.
Yes.
And immediately would see changes in national law to be in harmony with what the region has agreed. We saw how the EU copied the first East African
That's correct, they did.
community approach and run with it. And the EU is the strongest bloc now
in the world.
In the world.
So you mean EU picked from?
Yes.
That's
from
what I was saying at
first
the beginning,
community.
and it's a serious observation.
Interesting.
That really our views ought to take. I'm just going to say, we need to know that ever in this East Africa, the original programs were designed, it was successfully working, the EU picked it up and they ran with it. And those days they called it the EC, East African Community. It's a serious stuff. So we are a better people. It is possible for us to do better than where we are.
Yes. So second is to look at like the failure since 2005, 6, the failure to adopt the protocol on good governance, vetoed by Uganda because of term limits.
And
other issues.
Yes. I know at the beginning of discussions for fast-tracking East African integration, each country, especially Kenya and Tanzania, had reservations. Kenya had
fast-tracking.
Yes, Kenya had 2 concerns. One, they would always ask, why fast-track the integration? They would pose a question to Uganda that, for example, integrating with Uganda, you are integrating with poverty. Then
Rightly so.
during the women consultations, the women had their own unique concern that Ugandan women, who are very submissive, are going to take their men.
Can you imagine that becomes an issue
of course,
against integration?
Of course.
Of course, women always have governments anyway as well. A woman is a weapon of mass destruction.
Yes, so then Tanzania, of course, had concerns, which are still standing today. The concern of land, which almost broke the community at one point. And we saw the expulsion of people they thought were non-Tanzanians, and the attempt to redemarcate borders, where some people found their bedrooms in Tanzania and their kitchen is in Uganda, amidst integration. I thought really that was really something. And so these were the concerns in the member states.
What of the Mijingo issue? And
Yes, then after of course, adoption of the early stages of the community, then we started fighting for a smaller piece of land over shared resources, over the lake. The President Museveni has made a famous speech saying the waters belong to Kenya, but the fish belongs to Uganda.
So what do we own in common and what not?
That conflict is
so long as we have the fish.
It's not resolved yet. The communities on the island have 2 sets of administration. We have both the OC system in Uganda and the other local system in Kenya. On the island, once in a while there are fights. We saw recently also the capture of fishing authorities by Kenya, I think just last month, when they were trying to inspect the fishing methods and the fishing of premature fish. You know, there are so many things. At times it's difficult even to trace where the problem is.
No, it's leadership. If I may just say
leadership.
so very briefly.
Yeah.
Actually, what normally happens, including with the EU,
Yes.
there would be really no problem that if the original object is to bring us together, where we could actually integrate as a sub-region, a sub-region in diversity, but as a continent in diversity. And how that can happen is, for instance, you have exceptional clauses where perhaps a nation state like Tanzania may not necessarily succeed,
Accept that.
can argue that, look, for us, we are not integrating unless you allow us to confine our land. Things like that. And then the things debated
If
and
you
things
substantiate
precisely.
your
So it's really not necessarily give all for the sub-region and not necessarily give all for the entire continent. But if the object is as our founding parents were, there is nothing insurmountable. Yeah.
Yes, so if you look at Kenya, I forgot to mention that Kenya still charges permits to Ugandans. For Ugandans working in Kenya, every 6 months, they have
Renew
to
your
drive
permit.
back to the border to get a new stamp and renew their existence in Kenya. Yes. Whereas Uganda has opened up and we have Kenyans occupying our hotels and everything.
Yeah.
So if you go to the basics of integration, and I'm trying to score, the basics of integration, one is free movement of people, goods and services. I would give it 40%. Because we have a closed border, we have this back and forth, we have arrests, we have disharmony in terms of who belongs where and approaches on trading, so that it doesn't. It exists to a small extent. If you come to the issue of harmonization of policies, I would give it 20%. Every country is doing their own
things.
Uganda does not have term limits, does not have free and fair elections. We are increasing militarization. Kenya is democratizing, trying to respect the constitution. The courts are alive at defending the constitution of Kenya. The citizens are more active. When you go to Tanzania, Tanzania is regressing. At the beginning of integration, it was viewed as a more stable country that would help neutralize the chaotic. But now it is very unstable and competing with Uganda in regressiveness and unstableness. When you go down south, Burundi is really always in chaos, with even sanctions that are now trying to be lifted. Rwanda is in its own world, closing borders, and Uganda and Rwanda are not about to stop bickering, just like Tom and Jerry cartoons. Yes.
Are you saying they're twins, but not really identical?
If anybody has watched Tom and Jerry, that is the leadership of Uganda and Rwanda, in my view. Then when it comes now to the monetary union, single currency, really, I don't know whether I will be able to see that in my lifetime with the current leadership. East African Federation, it is a dream. And I want to call upon citizens to challenge their leaders. A leader cannot take to a podium and deceive people that they are seriously working on a federation when they cannot talk to their neighbor. When the community can no longer hold a summit.
True.
When borders are closed. Are you going to federate in air? Are you birds? So that one, really, the other two pillars, I would score them 1%. They are just imaginations.
For which within the context of that, actually, very interestingly, that terrible score that we had. For the record, we had the East African shilling before. So monetary union in this country, I mean in this sub-region, is actually possible because we had the semblance of it.
Monetary discipline.
No, but
let's look at the rising public debt.
The other
rising public debt in the East African countries, the rising inflation, the high corruption in Uganda and Kenya, and to some extent Tanzania.
I am just demystifying the impossibilities as presented. That if all the key things that my colleagues are mentioning and we talked about, generally there's no reason why these things cannot be possible.
Yeah.
Just for the younger Ugandans and East Africans and Africans watching these things, that there's now nothing of these things which is impossible because we started it and it ever happened. And then quickly, again in diversity, the British, before they went crazy, conservatism, right-wingism is as bad as those extremism, So they went in with their Brexit thing, serves them right sometimes, They kept the pound in the bigger EU coming togetherness when Britain was a member state.
Yes.
But by and large, it functioned. Yes. The Norwegians played very, very conservative in their own many ways. But by and large, they continued. But then I was trying to emphasize, these guys kept their pound when Britain was still bound there.
Yes.
And sort of, it worked.
But wasn't that a crack? Wasn't that a crack?
In a way,
the beginning of disintegration and the Brexit?
In a way, it was an element of lack of trust, and the sense of superiority, imperialist superiority. Yes. But I'm simply saying, below that, there are some of these other things that are obstacles, but they don't make the entire thing an impossibility. If really we drive these things on behalf of the interests of all the African peoples. Because what I'm saying here, for example, if we become then one East Africa, the reality is that most Rwandese will not necessarily speak the Padola. There will be those who may not necessarily integrate to speak English from French and things like that. So these are practical realities that exist. But in diversity, is it possible for us to be one people? Of course it is. And that's my point.
Interesting. Joseph, I think it's now time for us to have our short break. And interestingly, because we'll need to have these conversations going, and just into the break, we'll need to get to ask our viewers out there that you need to follow this discussion. We are live on our YouTube, live on YouTube, Civic Space TV, on Facebook, live there. You go to our of course, Twitter, Chat Show UG, kindly follow this conversation. We are live. Please be part of this conversation. And right after this short break, we'll get back. Thank you. Welcome back from that short break. And of course, thank you for being our ardent followers and viewers for this show every Friday afternoon as we engage issues around the country and of course the region now. Of course, thank you very much. And on my panel, of course, I've been joined today by Joseph Ochieno. I have Monicah Amoding and Sarah Bireete, of course, my usual suspects on this show. And the farmer. And the farmer. Now he said farmer.
Full-time farmer.
And thank you very much of this discussion.
I am the trainee farmer in the farm.
You're getting integrated.
Yes.
And I think Monicah is also a farmer.
Small time, not full time.
No,
Sarah is big time.
Big time.
Because our discussion is being powered by Inspire Africa Coffee, and we thank them for always giving us this coffee that is Ugandan itself and giving us the energies. Into our discussion, Monicah, we ended and you had, of course, to make a rejoinder, and I would want to invite you in at this point.
Well, I think Joe made some very interesting comments, and he was making a case for the future. And the future that he was envisioning is one where there are possibilities of making this East African community work. And I think that is where I also want to peg my visioning for the region. And I think that one of the things we lost out is nurturing a certain generation, because the generations of the Nyereres, I think, is still just having Museveni around and a few others. And in terms of the active citizenry in the region who are persons behind this issue of regionalism, nationalism, maybe Joe is lucky to have been groomed those days in that kind of schooling. But if you look at maybe 2 generations from the 80s, I could say 70s, probably up to today, we barely have that good grounding of all leaders. Let's start with leaders, first of all, those who come to decisions, positions of making decisions which are important to the people. I'm not quite sure whether they are grounded in this whole discussion of East Africa, regionalism, and why it's important. But I want to say, as I make that submission, is that we have to go back to that foundation. Why is it important to integrate in the first place? Why is it important for our people in the East African region? Until we deal away with these borders in our minds. Because East Africans, Ugandans, quickly buy Chinese product, quickly buy, you know, European products. They feel they are superior. All systems we've adopted wholesome. But we are very reluctant and even perhaps not knowledgeable on what we should do to promote this Pan-Africanist, you know, ideology, Ubuntuism, why we should rely on one another as Africans. And so it goes back to that. The borders are still in our minds. The colonial borders are still there. We don't even appreciate why it is important to have this integration in terms of our growth and development. Above all, the leaders that come to make decisions are not well equipped. And I can recall in my time growing as a leader, it's just a few times we went through an Ungozi Leadership Institute, something like that. And thereafter, and that is, those are courses offered outside the mainstream curriculum. They're not in the, you know, the mainstream curriculum of these various countries. But if you reflect at the senior citizens of that time, the East African spirit was alive in them. Is it still alive in us? Me, Sarah, and Joe, perhaps, maybe. But a few others beyond me, my generation after.
No, as a disclaimer, sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely in the three of us.
It is.
And I think part of the challenge that we are raising, you know, because I don't want you to kill your own point.
No, I'm not killing
no, but
it.
yeah, it's quite clearly in us. And part of our argument is that we don't know how many of us out there.
I am making a case for a generation above me, those in the 30s, in the 20s. And those who are going to have as leaders
and
tomorrow,
then to interest themselves
in the 10 years here and there. I don't think they are even grounded in the spirit of the East African. Secondly, the people themselves in the region, we noted that earlier. And also the engagement of the civil society, the civic engagement. Those two things are lacking because I think the leaders have deliberately left out the people. And so people are not exercising their power in terms of, you know, the governance issues in the region, but also in terms of envisioning where they want to go as a people. So I think my point really is pegged on ensuring that going forward, maybe one of the discussions we need to have is how can we, for example, when the ministers woke up and said no more products of, you know, poultry coming into Kenya, there would be a citizen somewhere saying no. This is unwanted, unwarranted, unnecessary. Can the borders be opened? I would have loved to see Ugandan doing that, a Kenyan somewhere, Tanzanian, speaking out as a civic citizen in terms of enforcing one voice and all that. So
maybe Kenya, but do we have civic rights in Uganda to protest?
No, I think that's important.
I think it's important for us Ugandans to know that where are the limits. Well, you may feel a bit lazy to engage in these things, but ultimately, it comes back to you as a citizen.
Sarah is actually talking about the absence of the space, which is extremely important. Absence of space within the civil society, and that's very important.
That is very important. It's noted, but I saw people trying to engage, of course, in the little ways that they have. They went before the ministers, they went before parliament and made a case. The poultry farmers.
Yes.
And so more of those actions should be happening. More of this ideological reorientation of the young people, of the leaders. And the point that Joe makes earlier was very critical. How are they even elected? The East African. I would have loved for us to have a legislator from East Africa here on this set. Because then how they are elected also will tell us how they become accountable. They, even us who vote them, the members of parliament that vote the East African parliamentarians, hardly do we get reports from the East African parliament talking about the progress in terms of fast-tracking the, you know, integration. So if, for example, that election is brought to the lowest level, maybe regional, then they can be able to come and communicate to the public, rally people, organize people. They would be more relevant in terms of leadership and all that. But as it is, we vote after 5 years, you can hardly trace what they have delivered on in terms of laws and policies. That's if you know them. So it's a big challenge, and that is where the real issue is. The power of the people, how can it be strengthened? And of course, dealing with the leadership. Some people are like Sarah have argued, not until the two big men or three in the region are no longer in those positions.
But particularly two.
Particularly two.
And we know
you
them,
know
yes.
them. Then the East African, well, I have hope now in the new teams that are coming, perhaps.
Which one?
After 10
Kenya,
years, 20.
in Uganda. And,
Uganda, there's a new team coming in Uganda.
Hopefully there are other teams that are coming in the region. So let's have hope as East Africans. But above all, we need to reclaim. I noted earlier that the treaty allows us, because this is the mandate, it is actually a requirement by partner states to avoid from those kind of behaviors that derail us from going forward. And so we should challenge these guys, even in courts of law. It is our right as citizens to engage.
Maybe we'll be able to challenge those that will come after them, like you've said.
Two quick additions. Absent in this debate. Where are the East African academia? In Uganda, where is the academia?
Oh, we're supposed to be with them.
We're supposed to be here, Professor Masesa.
but
the researchers.
Yes. But in terms of the debate, even beyond this panel, extremely important. But number two, I actually think, is the quality of civil service when we're trying to talk about these things. The guys who design and advise these ministers carrying briefcases and playing around with their dollars. The quality of officials, as they would call them, officials who sit with these guys, who craft these legislations, who craft the bureaucrats, the quality of them. I don't know who, and I'm saying absolute respect, fellow citizens, fellow Ugandans, I don't know. I am absolutely confident that the quality of the Kenyan bureaucrats are actually not bad for the Kenyan strategic agenda.
No, but how would they advise their minister to do that?
Well, and that's why I'm saying it's extremely important. So we need the bureaucrats who have an idea. We need the bureaucrats who are really East African in their thinking and values, and the bureaucrats who are basically African strategists for the long term. I'm not quite sure whether we have enough of them here in Uganda, and I'm not attacking you guys, but prove me wrong.
Yeah, because that's important, because now if they advised Kadaga, the Prime Minister, the third Premier, to do the same thing, or Minister of East Africa, actually I think that we shouldn't have retaliated with those kind of policies, because Uganda is on the receiving end anyway. And in the interest of the East African community, I don't think the President would be happy presiding over a cabinet which has passed such a recommendation that let Uganda reciprocate the relationship that we have with Kenya in that way. I do not think he would sit in that cabinet meeting and approve that. From what I know,
it came
in terms of the spirit that he has in the East African and also...
You know the spirit
is the politics.
You know what?
You're being very kind people.
I hear Honourable.
I think they are in era. They are in era and they shouldn't do that.
But deep down, I'm like, okay, Kenya has been at it for quite a while. We have, at times I buy milk. I think I originated it from Kenyatta's factory.
UHT.
It is very nice.
Is it?
I forget the name. Yes. High quality.
Brooklyn.
Yes, Brooklyn.
Yeah,
Long,
Brooklyn, yes.
Among the long-term milks.
Long life milk. Yeah.
Long life, it's quite among
It's
the
quite
top.
good.
Yes. So, but if you broke,
Yes.
my goods. And I think Uganda has been patient, because this has been on for like 2 years now. You broke milk, you broke maize, now it's poultry. At one time we broke salt. It's been on for quite a while. So when do you act back? Yet the treaty says if you negotiate and things fail, you can retaliate.
But you know, Sarah,
maybe the negotiation failed.
But the part
Yes, I know. Yes, it's provided for.
But after 2 years, that doesn't
In
mean
the common markets protocol.
but that doesn't mean then you fail. So really, over the 2 years, isn't Museveni with the hotline to Kenyatta?
Really?
What exactly?
I was about to say that, you know, there's a time Honourable, His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete posted after South Africa and Tanzania flashed out M23 in DRC. He just posted the one short sentence tweet that there has to be an elder in the room.
There you go.
So what we are missing in these East African trade wars is an elder in the room. Because it's been on.
I thought being an elder comes with age.
In which way?
No.
By the way, wisdom.
In
wisdom.
wisdom.
Wisdom and
Wisdom
authority.
has nothing to do with
With
age.
age.
Yeah, yeah.
But
No.
I thought Kampala would be
In our
would be at the
understanding,
head
it is
of
the
that.
age.
Yes.
In
When
the
each
African
quarter
context.
hosted,
No, this one is
yes,
playing
that
wisdom,
they had-
leadership, and everything, but
that
it's not.
there had to be an elder in the room. He was not the eldest among the leaders. You see, and when you have wisdom as a leader, you don't parade it. You
No,
don't talk about
it
it.
is.
You don't. It speaks for
It's
itself.
evident.
Yes.
It's eminent. Okay.
So we have a problem of leadership in the East African community. Because look at the time, because Kagame is the outgoing, I don't know the current, because Kagame chaired the ESC
The most immediate.
for 2 years. After AU, he chaired the ESC, or he was chairing at one time, both of them. But that's the time he could not convene a summit, and he was part of the problem. So I think there should be even conditions. If you are, yes, I know it's rotational, but if it's my time to be a chair and I'm in a conflict, I think I should be jumped to the next one.
Or you step aside.
Until I
step aside,
resolve
yeah.
that conflict,
Yeah.
then the queue can be brought back.
You step aside.
So you are part of a problem. You are at the center of
Resolving it.
causing tension in the community. You assume leadership of the community, and he did his tenure ended with no summit.
Can imagine.
Absence of
With
institutions.
impunity.
Yes.
So I think that we need to review. Maybe it's time
That's why I say.
we need a citizens process
Activism, yes.
that can lead to review of components of the treaty and procedures on how the treaty is convened and ensure that it is actually people-driven, not in theory,
Yeah.
but in practice.
But I would want to understand, how then does the Yala, what is the mandate of the Yala team, the MPs? Then they come in and advise and also push for some of these agendas?
Advise
some of
who?
the-
When in Uganda's case, they go down there for jobs, patronage.
Because then
The
I
Lord
thought
Bala
the real sole reason
So you think an
for...
ELM
to
MP is going to
Yes, is to push
But you
and
see,
to
the
champion
supreme
and
organ
ensure
of
that
the
that
community
happens.
is the summit.
the summit, which is the
Not
So
the-
you want
and
the
ministers.
ministerial, the procedure
Should be like an
of the
advocacy
committee,
arm to
yes.
ensure that we
There is
have...
a technical committee, which is the civil servants.
Commission.
Yes. Then there is the parliament, EARA.
Legislative.
Then there is interministerial, and then the summit. So how does a legislative, which is number 3, jump the ministerial to advise the summit? We need another committee that can call the summit to the order. And that committee can only be the people.
Yes, and that's what Sarah is really saying.
Yeah.
And I made a declaration here, which you didn't get very seriously. I want to repeat that's why I was saying that in the event that there was a UPC government, we would actually do exactly what Sarah is saying. But in the absence of a UPC government, as we wait for that, this is very important. As we wait for the UPC
So
government,
they are the newcomers, perhaps.
no. Look, as we wait for the UPC government, we need to find a way in which there is
UPC
sufficient.
is
there's-
already in government.
No,
It's already...
As we talk right
please,
now.
please don't spoil this conversation. no, we need a space within which there is a critical emergence of Ugandans, cross-section of Ugandan citizens that put pressure,
Yeah.
on the government. Turn this into a national debate, a serious national debate, including budgeting. We spend huge amount of money on these guys. What do we get in return?
Yeah.
Instead, their inconveniences cause cross-border issues.
Let me add this, Demian, with your permission. East African communities just celebrated 20 years, the reemergence.
Yeah.
the
Since
reestablishment.
2000.
Yes. When they were marking these 20 years, the top celebrations, in Uganda, there was nothing. I don't know how many people heard about it.
Not at
Yeah,
all.
did not hear.
I did not.
You
Thank
refuse
you.
to remind me.
Thank you. Arusha, which is the seat of the legislative as well as the judicial arm of the community, hosted celebrations. But as they marched through Arusha town, people looked at them like
They didn't know what was
tourists.
happening.
Yeah.
Nobody joined them from the crowds. Nobody waved for them. You would just see a dead community moving. Because other than the delegation,
Or a community of the few.
there was no celebration among the people.
because interesting, I want to now understand, because we've talked about it and it seems like it is the leadership that is bringing out these all issues. But I wanted to, because our viewers out there should not be only limited to the politics of it. I just want to understand what is the real main challenges that we are facing that are limiting, that are failing us to integrate, but importantly also for the trade.
To air this view of mine, and I think that one of the issues we are battling with here is the poverty levels in the region. Because then if we don't bring this in the discussion, Sarah and Joe, I mean, the politics right now that we have in the East African region, even if we go state by state in terms of analysis, in terms of the impact of the politics and the policies on the ordinary person, at the end of the day, what does a person in Rwanda take home in terms of the incomes? If you come to Uganda here, how meaningful is, political leadership to the ordinary person? What do I take home at the end of the day? If you go to Tanzania, it seems like the economy is big, and Kenya, but at the end of the day, what is the ordinary person in Kenya and Tanzania living with? Burundi, I think, is the worst. What do they call that one? The odd man out or something in the region. Which other countries? South Sudan. The poverty levels, obviously. Which other countries are coming on board? Well, we hear rumors that the Sudan might join, and also the East DRC here. And that's Somalia. Why we are constructing the roads.
And Somalia.
And Somalia. So generally, Somaliland, there's another in that direction. So
Somaliland is okay. It's the chaotic Somalia.
The chaotic Somalia.
That the leaders are putting into the community.
So I would like to submit that the poverty levels as well in the East African region do not even give people the ability to reflect, because the political rights and civil rights in the hierarchy of rights, in a way, for a poor person, it is a luxury.
Do you know, if you don't mind, that is precisely the reason why this is important. Had there been information and had people been informed, and if anything, the integration is not only about the reunion of our peoples together, but really most importantly, the object is this, that when we are together, we are an open market. When we are together, I don't have to pay, for extra taxes to get a bit of tea down across Kenya. When we are together, it is actually possible for me to go and work the other end of Butare and then come because the conditions there is okay. Basically, that's the whole thing. The idea is basically to uplift, the well-being of our people. And by and large, it should really be about, chucking poverty in creating a community in which we're able to reconverge. And that's why the convergence criteria is important. Not necessarily that all of us must be upper middle class to merge, but by and large, we made this criteria so that when people come together,
ideally,
we're able to celebrate.
That is what the leaders have failed to do and are letting us down in that perspective. But also the citizenry right now is unable to do, the checks and, that raise that conversation to that point because of the status of poverty and the life, the appalling conditions of life. You are barely occupied with survival than even questioning the relevance of that East African so-called something that is up there in the air. So it's a two-way, but also we need these citizens to, engage, knowing that it benefits in the long term because of the job creation, the markets that we have and all that. So I think we still have a lot of work to do.
In our last question, possibly, maybe we'll tackle that issue of how do we get the people involved in the community. If really we need it, really, how do we then get them awakened? That is important for us to integrate. Because I think by population, we're about 178 million people, including now with South Sudan in the region. But I think if you combine the entire GDP of, I think, the whole region here, we could be around with Greece in the American setup. I think it's Greece that we could be, and that is the poorest in that region.
In the region.
Yes. But now here, we've been talking about the issue of leadership. But it is not that the current leadership has been the issue. From the history that Sarah has given us, it spans back from the Idi Amin era.
No, they've been. No, they've been.
Yes,
Amin
but
was
it's not the current. I will not say it's the current, because ideally we've been functioning well. When it started, it worked well. Then along the way,
Actually, the arguments here have said it is the leadership which has let us down in the last 20 or 40 years, I mean 30 years.
Yes, but Demian, again, yeah, you've specified the number of persons in the East African countries. We are the highest populated bloc in Africa in terms of the region. Population.
Regional blocks, yeah.
And we have 5.7% of the total world population in East Africa.
Wow.
That's, in terms of the cost-benefit analysis, it's a big market.
It is.
If any of these countries had a large consumer factory, you have a big market to explore. You have resources in terms of labor and raw materials. If we were organized, we can even do a comparative, advantage analysis and say, Uganda, you are good at coffee. You are good at, we list like the 10 best countries, products each country is producing. Because the issue of competition. For example, maize in Kenya, at first they said our maize had aflatoxins, which could have been true, yes. And that goes to the, one stop border posts that are supposed to test, certify, and verify, and codify these products before they are, exported or whatever, taken to the market. Where were they to detect these aflatoxins? Because that is the quality assurance mechanism in terms of the customs functioning. You have, the one stop, you have your Uganda people on this side, you have the Rwanda people on this side, and a passenger or a businessman is attended to at once. Uganda, you check what you want to check, Kenya checks what they want to check, and you're cleared at once and you walk out. Because it saves time, and then goods are certified and verified. That means that the quality assurance has been done. So if you look at all these trade wars, I think what needs to be done, in my view, if there is leadership, is to say, call a Council of Ministers meeting. Say, what are the issues?
Called by who? At the moment.
If you have a chair,
the summit
chair, then the minister chairs the Council of Ministers. So the chair
That's
of
if
the
the
ministers.
chair is willing to
I don't
have that happen.
I don't even know the
coalition.
I don't know the current chair. Is it Uganda?
The current
No
chair?
idea.
Okay, we shall find out. Google will
The
tell us.
coalition of the willing.
So the current chair should call the ministerial meeting and say, each one of you, or even it could start with the technical teams. What are the concerns?
What is the problem?
What are the concerns? What are the concerns? They sieve out the issues. What should we present to the ministers? Because for a Council of Ministers to meet, first it's the technocrats meeting, 1 or 2 days. Sieve out the issues and propose solutions.
In that case, it would be the East African Parliament. They've just
No.
Probably. Because they are the representatives of the people.
Of the people.
Yeah,
That's
also
why,
the
to me, that's what I
committee.
felt. Yes.
The trade committee can meet, but these are issues that are supposed to be sorted out by the ministers, in the ministerial committee. So you then present a
But
memorandum.
they need to be pressure. But from who?
But why should they be pressured? Isn't there enough
For the
pressure
good
by
of the
these
region.
quarrels?
Do the right thing.
I think at most for us citizens, we are going to go to court.
Surely.
And say, Uganda and Kenya, we are tired
Of your
wars.
bickerings.
Then you put expel them, suspend them from the community. Until they sort out their
for the interministerial committee, for the interministerial committee to meet, because they are working on the interests of the appointing authority. Like if they are political appointees, then they can't really decide against.
No. You see how regional
different
mechanisms work is that we get on table, everybody states their interests and complaints and propose a way forward. Then you agree, you generate consensus in the room. What you generate as consensus, you produce a memorandum to the ministers for discussion and adoption. what they think is the way forward, the problem and the way forward, is presented to the summit. And the summit takes the decisions, and then decisions are implemented. That's how regional blocs work.
Sarah, if I may peg in a little bit, what is at stake right now is a total breach of the treaty. And the treaty requires peaceful settlement of conflicts.
Yes.
Now, the closure of borders, eminently, you can see that there is a total breach of the treaty, and incrementally, every other day that is happening. And somebody needs to do something else. That is why this question...
There are 2 petitions
already.
in the East African Court of Justice
because
about
this
closure of borders.
It's a breach, and the treaty is very clear on how we should settle our disputes, be it economic, be it political, be it whatever conflict that may arise. And so I think the partner states are not taking advantage, particularly the notorious partner states in this case.
The Tom and Jerry.
Uganda is Uganda is notorious. I don't know if it is Tom in this case or it is a Jerry. Rwanda is very notorious. Burundi is quiet in its wars, but it's also getting sucked in the big brother fights. South Sudan is too notorious in a way that they even evade payment of the fees.
The current share.
Do they have an idea about the obligations?
Kenya is the current chair.
Interesting.
Oh, chair,
yes, of the East African
and it is the
But
first
they seem to be the most sober ones. But
Which sober when you are the first to actually expedite these bans. And so Kenya should really be serious in its approach in terms of the East African issues. So,
But I think our time is fast spent. I would want us to go now to the closure and where we're talking about the way forward for the integration, to ensure that at least we go back to where it was, where it started, where EU picked it from.
Way forward for me, from the beginning, I had noted that the citizens, if there are court petitions, I'm happy to hear that, because I think this treaty is being abused by the partner states, and the leaders are watching, are actually enforcing it, and are the first to breach it in terms of the actions that they are taking. And I would like to really caution our leaders, the ministers in this case, right now involved in this saga. It's not necessary. Negotiate, discuss, get a consensus, because at the end of the day, who is losing what? I think we all lose out in many ways. Uganda is exporting a certain, although we've not discussed in terms of the percentages, who is earning what and more, or more than the other from this. Kenya loses out a market, Uganda loses out. So why wouldn't we sit and always have a consensus? What is too difficult to resolve in that perspective? So consensus, negotiation should be the way to go. Citizens should arise and take their part, or positioning in this whole discussion. We seem to be lacking, even if it means to go to court. I'm happy that those court petitions are there. Maybe it will help us to wake up the leaders. And of course, I talked about the academia, the deliberate preparation of the next, because this team is going, I believe so. The current leadership in the East African region, we've recently had a president in Tanzania. I don't know how long she will be in that chair. But Kenyatta clearly is on his exit. I believe Uganda, similar things are happening, maybe, in the other neighboring countries as well. So there is a hope, and we need to challenge the people that are coming on that East Africa is important. It is for all of us, and we need to retrace our roots to our forefathers and the reasoning why they had this. Pan-Africanist spirit must be kept alive. The East African spirit, because it is in the interest of our children and the next generations that come after us as well. So leaders should have that mindset as we make decisions.
Thank you very much, Monicah. Sarah?
Well, as Monicah was sharing that Uganda is, which way? And then I remembered it's one of the concerns of Tanzania in as far as the East African integration process is concerned. A failure to transit politically has been one of the discomforting issues as far as Tanzania is concerned. And in one of the meetings that I happened to attend, there was even a joke by Tanzanians to say, we sacrificed a lot to get rid of Idi Amin. We thought Uganda would operate as a normal country, and they were a bit disappointed. So we have the challenges are political, economic, social. They are diverse. They demonstrate a lack of leadership, at least honest leadership. Because leadership is not the mere occupation of a chair. You know, there's absence of honest leadership. We have several cases in the East African court challenging human rights violations, challenging vulgarization of our elections, and we are debating this at the time when Kayunga people are breeding. Breeding with militarism, with torture, with brutality, with the leaders arrested and detained, with people beaten, vote rigging, ballot stuffing, and the rest of it that comes. You know, a very nasty democratic exodus in Uganda is very discomforting for the East African integration agenda.
Thank you very
Is
much,
that how
Sarah.
you've
for
concluded?
Yes. Joseph?
No, my hope is that that those watching, particularly the young people watching, take heart that East Africa is possible, that Africa is possible, that our founding parents actually sought to reclaim Africa for Africans, and that to do so in bits as they had intended. The East African community was massively impressive, as we said at the beginning, that it became the envy of the rest of the world, for which the European integration took shape. So that is actually possible. But to do so, I think young Africans, young academians will have to take much more interest. Ordinary Africans will have to take interest to the extent that they will have to compel their political leaders at political party levels. And that's why I was starting NRM. I know it's run by Museveni, whatever he says goes. I hope other political parties other than UPC, because for us, UPC, we're very clear about East Africa. We're very clear about the African identity and personality, including in one's own values. That political parties begin to do it in such a manner that we don't only send representatives to the Legislative Assembly to go and make money and survive, but we send people who genuinely know this region, people who are actually going to genuinely represent our interests from the base of our political parties and organizations, therefore this country in the region, to bring together East Africa. And in fact, when they go to the East African Assembly, the people have got an idea about the broader African personality beyond the boundaries of this country. I think that is what we really, really require. And I hope that political parties read my lips, that a future UPC government would make it compulsory that those we elect at the Legislative Assembly are tested by the people across this country, and that when we go to elections, national elections, you know, political parties are tested on their views, values, and the possibilities and commitments on bringing together African peoples, not necessarily in this paper thing, but that which really brings our peoples closer together than others, so that it's possible that within our regions, really, as an extreme last resort, that a Ugandan is able to go ahead and pick a spear to point at a Munyarwanda within Uganda, or in this case, a Congolese via Banyamulenge border in Congo. In that way, we shall be moving closer to an integration. And for me, that integration is possible. It requires leadership. I hope that leadership will emerge in this country at some stage. And of course, in Kenya, is soon emerging with the coming elections, as my colleague said. In Tanzania, I think Tanzanians, by and large, whatever happens, they will do it. It's up to Ugandans and the rest of other East Africans to say that, well, the bar should really be better than what we have at the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph. Of course, thank you very much, my panelists, Sarah, Monicah, and of course, Joseph, for always showing up for this conversation, and to the chat show. And to also our viewers out there, thank you very much for being ardent followers. I think and I hope that the conversation about this time has really reawakened your spirit to be part and also to demand better for the region. And of course, if we really think this is the right thing to do, please, you need to be active and see that we have a better region. And of course, see that at least we can change the course of action. It is today that we've also personally have learned that the European Union, of course, picked the idea from us here, which is something that you really need to be commendable. And of course, it is something that we would have been proud of if we really kept setting the pace for such integrations. Of course, to also our panelists that missed to be on the show, Mwambusi and Devesa, of course, we condole with him for that loss of the sister. We missed him today, and we thought he would add much more value to this conversation, quite informative he is in the region. He would have helped us understand better. But I think, of course, the people and my panelists today who have been on the show have done justice to the topic, and we've learned a lot. And of course, this conversation still is on YouTube, Civic Space TV. We're on Facebook, we are streaming live. We're on Twitter, the Chat Show UG. Kindly follow, comment, put your thoughts there. Let's share what we know about the region, and also demand for the best for God and my country.